Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And he goes, well, when I go out and I herd the sheep, he goes, I smell their breath.
And I have probably more paleoethnobotany friends than anyone else. But you know what? That's book learning.
We were supposed to do a authentic, true Hopewellian menu. That's something for academia. For people who are going out to eat and enjoy something, you know, that's when that's when the chefiness comes in, you know?
I'm Sarah Fensky. Rob Connoley is chef and owner of the acclaimed Midtown restaurant Bulrush. There, he uses food to tell the story of Ozarks cuisine, going back to a time when that was truly something distinctive. It wasn't until railroads were built across the state that it became easy to transport food around, he explains. And so in those years, before 1870, locals relied on the land around them. But Rob Connoley also knows that Ozarks cuisine is not the cuisine native to Missouri. After all, people lived here long before the Europeans showed up. He's long been interested in what indigenous Missourians ate, and his efforts to explore that story have resulted in an interesting collaboration taking place this weekend. And he joins us now to tell us about it. So Rob Connoley, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we're also joined today by Chef Freddie Bitsoie. He is a Navajo chef from New Mexico. He was most recently the executive chef of Mitsitam Native Food Cafe inside the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. And his new book is New Native Kitchen, celebrating modern recipes of the American Indian. It's available now for pre-order through Amazon. And he joins us today. So Chef Freddie Bitsoie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So, Rob, this story for us kind of starts with Bulrush, and you've long been interested in the food of indigenous Missourians, but you felt like this wasn't your story to tell. Why not?
Well, you know, there's the idea of cultural appropriation, and I start there because from that perspective, I have to make sure that the story is being told in a respectful way. And to me, respectful means in an authentic or honest way. So it's easy for me to read books, maybe talk to folks, and have my interpretation of the story, but that's still my interpretation. And so it's always been important to me to have original or first-person stories to share with the public because, you know, my customers want to know. I don't have the average customer, I would say. I have people who really want to know more about the history of the area. And so for me, it's important to do it that way. And you know, also just from a positive perspective, think of the diversity of voices that I can bring to the table, literally and metaphorically, when I bring folks from outside in, just like we're doing this weekend.
So yeah, tell us how that led to what's going on this weekend. How did you end up connecting with Chef Freddie Bitsoie?
Well, I knew of Chef Freddie from back in my time living in New Mexico, and we didn't really interact back then, but once I knew that he was at the Smithsonian, you know, anyone who's lived in New Mexico, it all feels like a very small town no matter where you live. And so we have this small town, hometown pride. And it was really cool to hear that he was the one taking the reins of the culinary world over in D.C. And so, you know, I had to bide my time until it seemed appropriate. And there's a lot of indigenous chefs out there right now who are doing really cool things, and they're all doing very different things. And I guess for me, it felt that what Chef Freddie was doing was the most pertinent to what we're doing here, the most interesting. And it certainly doesn't hurt that he's got this great book coming out that is exciting for me, and I think it'll be exciting for our diners.
So, Freddie, you have this book coming out, but what you're going to be doing when you're here in St. Louis this weekend is something a bit different than what you explore in this book. You're going to be exploring the food of the Hopewell tradition. A lot of Missourians may not know that term, even if they're somewhat up on the history of Missouri. What do we mean by the Hopewell culture?
The way that I view the history of Native peoples is kind of by region, So you have the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, and the Pacific Northwest. And then kind of in the middle, it's referred to as the Hopewellian culture. So where I'm from in the Southwest, the ancient peoples that were here were the Hohokums, who were down in Phoenix, the ancient Puebloans who were in New Mexico. And so the people who identified themselves in like the St. Louis area, the Chicago area, we refer them academically as the Hopewellian culture. So it would be the people who span pretty much the Great Lakes all the way down to Louisiana.
So when we think of the Osage here in Missouri, these would have been people who were descended from this Hopewell culture.
Yes, because there's a lot of migratory things that happened at a certain time back in historical eras. Like, for example, here in New Mexico, a lot of the ancestral Pueblos had to find new ways of farming, so they moved to the Rio Grande in modern day Albuquerque, and then some moved west to the Hopi, and some moved south to Zuni. So pretty much at the same time, that's where everyone was kind of relocating where they wanted to live. Maybe they had just bad family members that they just wanted to get away from. And so that's how people started to move around. And then the Osage moved further south, and while the Ojibwe, relocated further north. So it's kind of just a great way for everyone to relate to one another, because everyone has that tradition from ancient society.
So what do we know about what the people in this Hopewell grouping, what they would have been eating?
Well, we pretty much know from what we view as indigenous ingredients, things that just are from that area, things that just grew there and that continue to grow, because that's what the term indigenous means. It means products that come from a specific area in the world. So that's pretty much. I always have this great story. There's a Navajo weaver who raises and who is reintroducing this churro sheep. And I always ask him, how do you find the wild ingredients where you live in the Four Corners? And he goes, well, when I go out and I herd the sheep, he goes, I smell their breath. And it's really funny. To me, I thought, okay. And he goes, I go, because there's this great wild onion in the Four Corners. So when he smells that onion, he knows that, he's going to go back to where the sheep were and he's going to pick him. So, so when tribes, their idea of finding indigenous ingredients to eat were knowing where the animals ate, where they found berries, where they found roots, where they found certain vegetation, fauna throughout the area. So, that's how we identify what indigeneity is. And I think that's one of the great words of what's, in this new society. So Rob and I are really coming together to introduce what the Hopewellians used. I think that's what's really important, because I always joke about the menus that I write, because if I wrote a true ancient menu, it would just be a disaster, because the flavors that we are so accustomed today with acids, like vinegars or anything that, dealing with acid, tomatoes, were something that were not around. And everything, had a different flavor. So that's what I really do feel that I introduce things. So, like, for example, we're going to use some goosefoot, and it's very bitter. So we're going to use something less bitter to introduce that with dandelion. And then we're going to use prickly pear. Now, people always revert to thinking of that prickly pear, since it's a cactus. It's from the Southwest only. But as far as I understand, and from what I've studied, I have to put that in there, that and all the classes I've taken with prickly pear, every single state has a version of prickly pear. Now, they may not be one of the most sought after ingredients. But prickly pear has, it's even available in Italy. It's indigenous to Europe. So it's an ingredient that's always been around. And for example, in Arizona, there's these weird laws about cacti. Like with cactus, you just can't go out and harvest cactus. It's kind of illegal. And there's a black market about cactus. So people try to smuggle cactus out of Arizona. So just being a part of that, growing up knowing that you can't touch the cactus or you can't destroy it, it gave me, as someone who was raised in Arizona, even though it's an indigenous product that we can eat and enjoy, it was always something that we couldn't touch. So it's a lot of that colonialism idea, that's brought upon Native people, where we're even told we can't eat something that's indigenous. So the reason why, I use the prickly pear vinaigrette in this particular goosefoot salad is, we have to understand that it's just kind of a reintroduction of these ingredients and have people appreciate them a little more, knowing that even though there's wild fruits that grow everywhere, that they're edible. And people will never go hungry if they understand about these ingredients. You know what I mean?
And you had mentioned this idea that if you were doing sort of a Slavish imitation of what people were doing so many years ago, that this would taste off to people. So this isn't meant to be something that is 100%. This is a meal they would have had during this period. You're kind of filtering this through your own palate and your own techniques. Is that right?
Yes, and it's trial by error, And there's a joke that I always make. I always use two people. There's always an Italian grandmother who makes a better lasagna than someone, and there's always a Native American grandmother who makes fry bread better than another grandmother, So it's really difficult, and these are things that I have experienced at the museum, where I would get people from other tribes, because the museum cafe, is supposed to represent every single indigenous group in the Western Hemisphere. So it's almost impossible to live up to that standard because cooks are different, chefs are different. The way that I was brought into the native food, movement is the understanding that the ingredients are there, and the chefs are different, the cooks are different, but the ingredients and the awareness will always be there. So if people want to learn more and go deeper, that's what they would love to do. But again, we always have to understand that it's a dinner, it's food, it's we have to sit around the table and enjoy the food and enjoy our time together. Mm-hmm. We were supposed to do a authentic, true Hopewellian menu. That's something for academia. It's something that is just used for people who are really interested in it. But for people who are going out to eat and enjoy something, that's when that's when the chefiness comes in,
And Rob, so there's actually two meals that are coming out of this collaboration between Bulrush and Chef Freddie. The first is one that Freddie is cooking at Bulrush, and that's going to be all Freddie's cooking. Is that right?
My team will support him, but yes, it's his menu and his concepts and recipes.
And then there's a second meal. Tell us what's going on with this.
So on Sunday, then, we're taking the same concept. I wanted Chef Freddie to give me his menu first so I could draw from that. And then we're doing a more Midwest brunch. And so we're not doing the ancient Hopewellian tradition of biscuits and gravy, but we are going to be doing a biscuits and gravy using the Hopewellian ingredients. So we're going to have venison, and we'll also have lamb's quarter seeds, which that's the goose foot. And that's more the Bulrush style of making sure we're tapping into the Midwest bellies. We like our big portions here, and keeping it contemporary, but never drawing so far away from the history and the research that it doesn't look familiar anymore.
And so this meal, this one on Sunday, this is going to be almost Hopewellian food filtered through the Ozark Bulrush lens?
Yeah, it's the same way that Chef Freddie's doing the dinner, where he's giving a Southwest spin to it, and he's got a much more expansive perspective than I do because of his academic research, and then of course, as he just said, the work he does at the Smithsonian, and so here I have a little tighter lens to look through, and my lens is early 19th, late 18th century Ozark cuisine, where we've always said we look to the indigenous people, which are primarily the Osage and also some of the Cherokee, the European settlers, and the enslaved that the settlers often would bring. And so we take those three cultures and use them as the inspiration for the food that we create.
And so, Freddie, this dinner that you're doing on Saturday, even though you're exploring the Hopewellian culture, you're also bringing your own culture in as part of this. There's going to be a little bit of a Navajo spin or some Navajo ingredients in that?
Yes. I'm a firm believer in, if it's a menu from me, it comes from my feelings and it comes from where I cook. And so it just wouldn't be natural if I didn't put a part of myself in this particular menu. So as the way that I was brought up and the way that I relate to all my other Native chefs and friends and groups, we always gift things to one another. Like we will present something to appreciate something. So my appreciation for the whole event is, the first course, which would be the corn trio. And I'm going to bring some Navajo-style roasted corn, and we're going to make a corn broth. We're going to make a corn cake, and it's going to be presented in that factor. But it's not going to take away from the idea of the event. All it's going to do is say, this is a part of me, and this is what I'm bringing in. I'm sharing as your menu planner and chef for that night. And I think it will bring in an extra special motif to the menu, and I think it kind of is a great starter because even though people tend to generally think that corn has always been a part of Native America, when we look at the timeline of corn was actually very new to the area, and it was corn was invented in Central America, and then it moved north to southwest, and then as it moved east, it's been a newer product. So when we think about the Hopewellian culture, corn is a very new product, when we think about the time. And then as it expanded north, it probably was about a good 300 years new by the time the Europeans arrived in the Northeast.
Rob, hearing Chef Freddie talk about the history of corn, it just is taking me back to conversations I've had with you where you're exploring how long a plant has been in an area and how it came here and the foraging that you do. As you two are sort of exploring this menu together and putting this event together, have you just been geeking out about plants and animals?
Yeah, and of course it raises more questions than I have time to answer. That's the blessing and the curse of this whole Bulrush project is there's so much information and from so many sources. And I'll give you a quick good example. I've talked before on the show that I rely a lot on paleoethnobotanists. And I have probably more paleoethnobotany friends than anyone else. But you know what? That's book learning. And that's very different than what we're doing here. It's not that what we're doing here isn't very much grounded in academia and book knowledge, but it's also in tradition and history and families. And, for me then, yes, I am geeking out over the things he shares. Every time Chef Freddie talks, it takes me down another road of something I need to research, and I don't have time to even research the stuff that's on my list.
Cooking. I mean, come on here.
And we're really hoping that we can document all the dishes and the stories behind them and get them up on social media for Bulrush or my page, Chef Rob Connoley. And Chef Freddie may do the same because there's not enough seats in the house to get the word out to the number of people I think will be interested in this.
So this is both a series of good meals, and it's also really, there's a lot we can all learn from this just from being spectators.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Chef Rob Connoley, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And Rob, again, is the chef and owner of Bulrush, and also Chef Freddie Bitsoie. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I had a great time.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.